Moving on to the session for today, I am more than pleased to introduce our speaker for today, Gaurav Dhar. So just a quick introduction about him so then we can get started. So he's the CEO of the payments solution provider Marshal in Dubai. He has been working at Marshal for over 18 years now, and he strives to continually be on the frontier of building fintech ecosystems and solutions. So during his personal time, he spends it on working with and investing directly in innovators with a view to the future of fintech, both locally and globally, via his cachet of relationships, which include VCs, incubators, accelerators, and angel syndicates. So also in his position as a board member of MENA Fintech Association and several advisory positions to family offices and funds, he looks to grow relationships within the fintech startup ecosystem to contribute towards the education of budding disruptors and eventually to the growth of economies and the job market share where possible in the MENA region and abroad. So without further ado, Gaurav, the stage is yours. I'm handing it over.
Thanks so much. That was a very kind introduction. Just as an introduction for the format for today, I'm going to try and keep it as informal as possible, but there will be a structure. I want to try and answer as many questions as people have today for me. So it's very important that you put your questions not in the chat. Please put them in the Q&A context so that I can go through all of them and answer your questions personally. And I usually do sessions with regards to structuring reviews on pitching sessions individually. So I'll try and be as broad as perspective, but try and put things into as relevant a context for you to benefit from this section in terms of pitching as you can. So so let's go through the context, right? And talking about context today, we live in interesting times with COVID, right? COVID is here and it's basically had an impact. And the impact of COVID on investment is very interesting. In the beginning, what's happened is COVID actually restricted the amount of interaction between people. And if anything, what's happened now is because of that delay, there's actually been a rubber band effect. So you can imagine things have rebounded so strongly that there are even more investments being made in a shorter time with regards to what's happening in terms of investments today, because the way that funds work is that they operate on a ticking clock and they have to deploy funds within a time frame before they actually can raise another fund. So what's happened is that within the last 3 months, the amount of investments that have actually happened, and all obviously happened online through pitching, through Zoom calls and a digital interaction, has become almost 100%. And you can see this not because I'm telling you about it. You can see this on TechCrunch. You can see this on MENA Bytes, CB Insights, and Magnet. The number and volume of deals being announced is hugely frequent. So the result today is digital interaction for pitching has become the standard, whether it's on WhatsApp, Slack, email, and of course, where we are right now on Zoom. And today's discussion is going to be broadly following 4 topics: Zoom etiquette, engaging the audience, impressing a fund, and making a connection. I'm not necessarily going to follow that sequence, but essence, what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically do that in a holistic manner, right? And that was the agenda. So we can go to the next slide, please. Right. So who am I, right? To give you this information and context for you to understand my perspective, right? I started investing 6 years ago, and the way investments have worked is investments have happened through organic interactions, personal contacts. I was lucky to meet friends and people in the space. But as a global investor, I used to travel. And I used to travel to San Francisco, I used to travel to New York, I used to travel to India, Vietnam, Egypt to make investments. But with COVID, just as we've discussed, it's no longer the way that things have happened. But by ways and means, to give you more information about how you have to do this, I've gained experience from the perspective of a startup, an advisor and a board member of a startup, as an angel investor, a representative of a family office, a representative of a VC, a representative of global companies, and much, much more. And the reason I'm telling you this is because it's given me a numerous amount of perspective, right? And that perspective is key in what we will outline in today's workshop as well. And just to share with you, today I have nearly 100 investments in terms of startups and another 150 indirectly globally. And I've had exposure in investing in every stage of a startup's life cycle. So I've invested in a company from pre-seed all the way to pre-IPO. So I've understood the way companies have pitched through every single cycle, at every single stage, at every single size, at every single opportunity. And it's not all positive. Some of them have even died as companies. So unfortunately, as much as we hope and want to back and help companies grow, not all of them survive. So can I go through the next slide, please? Right. So yeah, the preparation, right? So now I think we can actually, now that you have the context of where I have perspective, we can talk about, this masterclass. And part one is preparation. And preparation is absolutely key. You have to make sure you've done everything before you can in terms of homework. If you've ever seen an episode of Shark Tank, and a lot of you will have used that as a benchmark to understand how pitching works because it's very entertaining and we all like it, you will see how the panelists absolutely destroy presenters who are poorly prepared. But in the other context, where presenters are extremely prepared, they make fast and big deals, right? The idea is everyone should start with a simple deck, 10 to 15 pages. Now, the reason I say this is your pitch deck should be simple to start with in 10 to 15 pages, because you then complement your pitch deck with a data room. So you can split your pitch into two main parts: what you're actually going to present in terms of slides and an overview and a narrative, and then what you can do in terms of actually doing a data room. And this gives you the advantage of not getting lost in detail until you get to Q&A. So I'll give you an example. If I'm going through my pitch model of financials, I can put up on the screen a slide that gives an overview of a 12-month or an 18-month projection of my business, depending on what stage I am. So if I'm in an early stage, it's a hypothetical projection. If I'm a business that's actually operating, I have to give a current projection and a future projection. Now, the details around those financials of how each customer is going to consume my product or service can be put into the data room. A detailed breakdown, customer profile, numbers, the margin, the context, the run rate. And then that's where you can separate your presentation so you don't get caught up in too much detail without telling the complete story. Because when you're telling the story in your preparation, it has to be a complete story. So keep it simple, 10 to 15 pages, and then have a well-structured data room. Don't get lost in too much detail in the beginning, but have it prepared, right? Now, the other thing is, please pitch with passion and please be interesting. People don't want to be, attending a pitch session and not understanding the passion from which a person actually wants to start a business, because that actually has a huge dynamic communicative effect to the people who want to invest in you. Because while you may be presenting, they may be presenting in an idea, but the one thing an investor always does is actually invest in people, right? And if I'm investing in a person and you're telling a story with a bit of passion and you're talking about either innovation or you're talking about how you're solving a problem, that passion has to be communicated, because you're going to be doing this business for the next 5 to 10 years, right? Sorry, it seems Farouk says he can't hear me. Is anyone else facing any auditory issues?
I can hear you.
Okay. It seems perhaps...
Yeah, I think
right, we can see some people.
Maybe
Okay.
there's a lag for Farouk.
Perhaps, okay. So I'll just recap, just so I can keep the momentum going on that, right? The idea is, first, you need to be prepared for your presentation. And when you're prepared for your presentation, segregate it into 2 blocks, have your pitch, run it between 10 to 15 slides if you can, but have a data room prepped with all sorts of details on your financial planning and other elements that are very important for the structure of your business to show that you've done paperwork, structure, regulation. So keep them segregated, but have them on hand. The second part of the entire structure of how you should present your pitch is just three things, really just three things. You should have a start, you should have a middle, and you should have an end. And it seems very obvious, but I'll tell you, honestly, people forget this a lot. Just looking at following a story, you have to have a start, a middle, and an end. And once you structure it just from something as simple as that, you can self-review your presentation to understand flow, right? How does it flow? Is the start linked to the middle? Is the middle linked to the end? And what I want to do is I want to talk about the start, middle, and end in a few concepts of what should be, what those elements contain themselves. So I want to say in the start, the first thing that you have to do is look at, right, what is the problem you're solving? How big is the problem? And tell the story, capture interest. So when you're opening your pitch with this start, this is where you're really you have the opportunity to capture the imagination and communicate passion. And this is where, once you describe this issue and how big this issue is, you can move to the next part, which is the middle, right? Which tells how are you solving the problem? How can you scale the problem? Solving solution, product, or service that you are solving for. And I've emphasized on problem because usually a problem is worth solving if someone wants to pay for it, but it could be an innovation. So you can replace problem with innovation, with new piece of technology, with XYZ, which is your area of expertise or the business that you're putting forward, right? So the middle part is you tell me how you're solving the problem, how you can scale that quickly. And you also have to highlight why you are different to other people that could potentially be doing the same thing, a similar thing, or could potentially copy you. So what you need to demonstrate to a person who is going to put time and money into you as a VC or a fund or an angel investor is to demonstrate that you've thought about the problem from a unique perspective, or you're solving the problem from a unique perspective, and you have unfair advantages. Either you are an expert, either you have knowledge that other people don't have, or either you're solving the problem in such a way that it takes someone else a very long time to do before they can catch up with you, or you're doing things simply in a way that no one's ever done, and to build it again, they'll have to catch you. So the start of the story is, you're telling me what is actually, the problem, right? So you're doing the start, middle, and end. So let's talk about what is the problem? How big is the problem? Then I go to the middle, which is what I'm saying is, how am I solving the problem? How I'm unique? And then I come to the end, right? The end is you're then telling me the team that is actually going to deliver on the promises you've made, where you've highlighted the problem, the solution. You're now talking about the people that you're going to invest in that's actually going to grow. And you're going to tell me all about what else you can do. No, there's nothing being shared on screen, Ruben, for the moment, because I want to keep the session. We can do an overview solution presentation we can send to everybody as a template. But right now, I just want to do a walkthrough of an overview. So if we do the start, the middle, and end, you can then choose what other pieces of information you want to include as part of that journey when you're presenting to people who you're trying to get money from, right? You can then validate, is the problem I'm solving interesting enough, right? In isolation, right? Then you can go to the middle part and say, hey, listen, is this technology revolutionary or innovative enough? Because I'm comparing it to benchmark of the other people in the end. When you look at the end of the presentation, you say, is my team strong enough? Am my structure strong enough? Am I doing this quickly enough to solve the problem? And am I asking for enough money, right? And then at the same time, you can look at your data room to see if the detailed information that is complementary to your storytelling is actually involved in that or not. So the content can grow or change depending on what stage you're investing at. So let's talk about like what stage you're investing at in your life cycle. There are a lot of people who will probably be investing in companies at very early stage. You're raising your first amount of money. And when you're raising your first amount of money, again, you do the S, you do the M, you do the E, you do the start, the middle, and the end of the presentation. And when you're doing that, what you're doing is you're trying to convince people that you're either the best or you're going to be the best in the market. When you're at the second mid-tier of your life cycle stage, you're talking about either you are ahead in the market, you have to show data, or you have to show how you are going to outgrow everyone in the market. So you have to present data, and your data room becomes bigger. And your pitch isn't so much about the idea or validating the idea because you've got market data to prove it. If you're going into a late stage structure where you're raising tens of millions of dollars, you're talking about how you're only scaling up a business and where the idea started, but how the idea is evolving. So as long as you keep the structure of a start, middle, and end, keep a complementary data room, you can then scale out. I guess we'll go to the next part of the presentation, please, if we can do from an overview, right? And that part is basically your audience. And this is extremely relevant when you are looking to pitch, because if you can understand your audience, you can be ready and you can make sure that you always, always, always will get demand for people to invest in your company. And it's something I've realized that people do very badly, is that they do not understand what information needs different communication to different audiences. So you have to ask yourself who you are pitching to. Are you pitching to an individual, a corporate venture capital, a venture capital fund, a syndicate, a family office, a small venture capital fund, a medium-sized VC? It matters who you're communicating to, because different people consume information differently, have different focuses of information and concern when they're investing, because their ticket sizes are different and their investment thesis are different, right? So this will allow you to connect and engage and do work prior based on the first template I gave you of this start, middle, and end structure and the complementary data room to suit that audience. So I'll give you an example, right? If you're talking to an audience, right, that does not have the subject matter expertise that you have, if you're building a company with artificial intelligence and you're building an audience with machine learning, they may not necessarily have the same understanding and language or capability of knowing how quickly you can scale the problem that you're trying to solve. So it's your obligation to be prepared to explain things in detail to those people, right? The second part can be perhaps you're pitching to a venture capital fund that only invests in artificial intelligence and machine learning, in which case you should be very careful about not trying to pledge that you know more than you actually do, because it'll harm your credibility, right? And credibility is key. And that's something else I want to talk about today, which is extremely important. In 99% of the pitch decks I see, the data to back any of the assumptions you make about your business, the scale of the business, the size of the opportunity has to be backed by credible data sources. If you can't back your information with credible data sources, it doesn't make you look credible to the investor about your knowledge of the market, the capability of scaling the company, and the return that they'll get on their investment. So you have to make sure that your integrity and credibility when you are pitching is backed by relevant data sources, whether it's CB Insights, whether it's The Economist, whether it's data from central banks or other global reports. Try and include as much references to credible data sources to maintain the integrity, that it's not just you that's talking about what problem you're solving or what technology you're using or how you can scale the business, but also with regards to other people in the markets that have actually done data studies from consultancy groups or Big Four or audiences that need to do it. So I would say that I'd like to stop there just from a basic structure, because just those two key points and fundamentals can be elaborated on massively. And I can share that information with you. I have it all with me, so you can follow it as a template post the presentation. I think it's best to open up for Q&A at this point in time.
We do have a couple in the Q&A, Gaurav.
Right.
What are the top 3 things you look for in any pitch deck without looking at the pitch deck first? It's an anonymous attendee.
No issues. So what are the top 3 things I look for in any pitch deck without looking at the pitch deck first? I think the idea would be around the sector. So when someone tells me, for example, that, oh, I have a company that I'm going to be pitching to you, I have to understand what interest it is for me. Is it a subject matter I know, or is it a subject matter I do not know? If it is a subject matter I know I can look at that pitch deck with keen interest, because the questions or analysis I can conduct with my own knowledge and experience will be very quick. And if I'm a person that's looking at hundreds of pitch decks a year, I will always favor looking at information decks that I'm familiar with versus information decks that I'm not familiar with, because ultimately things and sectors that do not have my subject matter expertise, that I'm not great at or have supreme knowledge on, I'll have to look at references, I'll have to study, and that will slow me down, which is coming back to the question with regards to, know your audience, right? You have to know your audience. So if I'm speaking to somebody, if I'm sending a pitch deck to somebody I know who knows subject matter expertise, it'll be relevant. That's the first thing I look at. The second thing I look at is who else has invested in the company or is interested in the company. Because if I'm an angel, I will want to know that the company is being supported by larger investors. If I'm an angel, I'll want to know that the company is being invested by other angels, particularly who are subject matter expertise, who give me confidence that they've done the review. So that's the second part that I would look at. That's the second thing is who else is looking at this. That's very important, because there's very few times at which a single VC or a single investor will consume the entire round of funding that's being done, right? The third thing is the speed and the information about the attention that particular sector or industry the pitch is involved in. So for example, fintech is a very hot sector. So it's very exciting to look at that at the moment, because it's a proven market which understands and tells me there are scaling and exit opportunities. Or geography, for example, it's a fintech, but it's in India. It's fintech, but it's in Pakistan. So the different size of the opportunity makes me understand what's actually happening. So the third thing is the actual sector clubbed with geography. So for me personally, as an example, I would love to look at a fintech opportunity in Latin America and Egypt or in India, because the size of those markets is very interesting, versus looking at it in a smaller country with a smaller population, with a smaller exit opportunity if it's not a global business. So those are the top three things that I would look at in terms of pitch deck before I open up the pitch deck.
Okay. There's somebody who's saying hi to you as well. This is Yasser Ismail. Oh. He has some
Hello, Yasser. Long time.
NFC. Next question. How can a fintech startup raise tens of millions of dollars in a seed round without generating a single dollar in revenue?
Right. Very, very, very interesting. So I must say, I have also invested in one of those companies that's raised tens of millions of dollars in a seed round without generating a single dollar of revenue. It's because those people, and I can't share their pitch decks with you because they're confidential, but what I can tell you is because they have done pretty much what I've asked of, a structure to demonstrate to you, but in the most mature level possible. So they've ticked every single box. They are extremely strong with the idea. They're extremely strong when it comes to the premise of the problem they're solving. And they're extremely strong with talking about the team and ability for them to scale in solving that opportunity. So for example, someone who is ex-Kareem or ex-Google or is ex-JP Morgan, and these are seasoned individuals who have been looking at solving the intricacies of large market problems and solving large, have the experience and the ability to demonstrate with a track record and confidence for people to invest in them turn on that funding. So typically speaking, that question is extremely, extremely relevant for second, third, fourth time founders who have a very strong track record of saying, hey, look, I've done this before 3 or 4 times. I've built companies, returned money to investors, or I've grown businesses from a $1 million business to a multi-billion-dollar business. And on the basis of that track record, you should believe that I can deliver this next promise, but I need tens of millions of dollars to deliver on it. I don't want to raise $1 million and then raise another $3 million because it's a distraction for them to keep fundraising. Fundraising is a very tough exercise, always trying to explain to people, convince people, and tell them that, you need funding is a continuous exercise. So that category of people that can raise tens of millions of dollars is a unique category. It's not the standard, it's unique and exceptional.
There's a lot of Q&A that's coming up. What is the needed milestone in terms of revenues for a startup to go and raise pre-seed, seed, or Series A?
What's the prerequisite for revenue generation? For a pre-seed raise?
What's the needed milestone in terms of revenues?
So I would actually argue that when you're doing a raise, even more than generating substantial revenues, investors focus more on you proving to them that the market has a fit and a need for what you're doing as a product or service, more than the amount of money you generate. So let me put that into context. If I'm doing a solution for a clothing brand, right? I'm trying to do a marketing solution which says that my technology allows you to get more customers as a clothing brand. You should use my technology and you'll get more customers. What investors don't want to see at early stages is that you have to fund them. They are funding you to prove that the idea works. What they'd like to see is that with your own ingenuity, your own passion, your own capability, your own sharpness, your own, ability to hustle, right? You're able to create a minimum viable product, MVP, implement it, and go to the target buyer of that solution, product, or service and say, look, these people want it and they want more of it, and I need money to scale my business. That is more key than understanding that I need to generate a fixed amount of 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 dirhams or dollars a month in revenue before I can go out and raise money. That's more critical, and that's something you should pay more attention to.
Okay. There's another question from Ajit, and I think the initial part may be part of what you answered already. How do you evaluate a startup when there is no revenue? Okay, that's one. Investors are impressed and do want to invest. How do you decide evaluation? I'm thinking evaluation is what he means. How much money?
He means company valuation.
Yeah. How much money invested and how much equity should be parted with? Please give some range, not necessarily accurate, like an approximate. Did you get the question?
So Ajit, this is a tricky question. There is no right or wrong answer, but 2 broad ways that you could address this is that, generally speaking, on every round that people tend to raise, they tend to raise between 10 and 20% in terms of dilution of the valuation of the businesses. So certain companies that go out into market, depending on the size of the market as well. So if you're solving $1 billion problem, right? Perhaps you need to raise more. So you would like to dilute up to X percent, 10 to 20%, and you need to raise capital to do it. But when you've got that metric demonstrating that you're solving the next problem, you can raise $1 million, you can raise $100,000, it depends on what your business needs to run. So the first thing to look at is, what is the size of the opportunity, right? What is the required funds for you to execute a business? And how will you sustain that? So I think, Ajit, have a look at how much money do you need to run the business for 12 to 18 months in terms of your spend on team, marketing, technology, infrastructure, intellectual property. And then when you look at that, then you'll say, what is that worth in terms of capital that you're willing to give away as equity, either 10% or 20%, with that value in mind to then scale the business. So if I need $5 million to run the business for 18 months, that's the money I need to raise. But if my problem is solving a problem that's only worth a total size of $5 million, can I raise $5 million? I don't think so. Maybe then it's not going to work. But if my problem is a $5 trillion problem and I need $5 million to start my business to address a $5 trillion problem, it might become more viable for people to understand that you're trying to capture much of that $5 trillion with $5 million over 18 months to start with post MVP. Think about it from that point of view rather than trying to think of how much money can I just raise as a standard. There's no template without understanding the TAM, SAM, SOM, right? Total addressable market size, the serviceable addressable market, and the market that you're going to capture 5%, 10% of that total size of pie. So try that first before trying to dilute equity and understand valuation.
What's your advice for idea stage startups? Should they be looking for funding at all in the first place, or look for funding only after rolling a product, even if partially, and have some customers?
Sandeep, that's a great question. So very, very simple answer. In my humble opinion, join an incubator at an idea phase of your startup. Out here, there are lots of other incubators in the whole region and all over the world that you can apply for, where they solve exactly this structural problem. They invite you to help you make your idea even stronger and go out and test it into the market. So they give you tools to understand technology, team, how to do your company build structure, geography, scale, and work with people who have experience to help you understand that as well. After you join an incubator, and if you feel like you're past the idea stage, you can then go into the second stage of idea, which is an accelerator. And again, accelerators are also very widely available out here. There's Techstars, there's Hub 71, there's Interlock, and each one has special focuses or sector focus of fintech, aviation, government solutions, transport, they all have their own specialities. An accelerator would be the correct step to approach after incubating your idea to understand where you can really push out and go into market. And then that stage, graduating from an accelerator or will be a good stage at which to raise funding.
We have a question from Sarah. 2020 was a challenging year for our startup. We had a dip in revenue, and we are now recovering to 2019 levels and beyond. How best to position this dip to potential investors?
So, Sarah, the way that you've got to look at this is if you had a dip in revenue in 2020 and your business is now returning to normal, the first thing that you have to communicate to investors is what happened. Be transparent, right? Make them understand that you're constantly learning, right? And that demonstration of how you are learning to solve problems while you're running, whenever there is a problem, you and your team can demonstrate resilience and still maintain the business, or perhaps even grow the business during things like a COVID pandemic. So that's how you position that to investors. Be transparent. Don't try and cover things up. Investors are very sharp. They prefer integrity. Tell them what you experienced, how you learned from it, or even feel open to ask people you trust for advice to help you structure through these problems if they come up again. So what you should do is you should communicate clearly that you experienced a problem, either you addressed it or you didn't address it, what your learnings are, and if in the future there are problems that will arise, how you will be more prepared from it from your experience. A business is not just 1 year. A venture is not 1 year. You still have time ahead of you, and there's a lot of work to do. So 1 year of dip, returning to normal revenues, and then growing consistently afterwards, focus looking forward. It's okay.
Gaurav, is there anything specific you look for in founders?
Oh, wow. Yes. I look for integrity. I look for knowledge in founders. If there's a founder that demonstrates subject matter expertise, if they can demonstrate in a humble way with humility that they have more knowledge than I do, or that where they don't have knowledge, they're willing to learn and go through it. That for me is an extremely positive quality I assess about about founders. From my perspective, looking at founders, they have to always be open to the fact that no matter how old they are, no matter how experienced they are, you always are learning your ability for decisions you make, right? Because if you're $1 million startup or you're a $120 million startup, no one was prepared for COVID. No one knew that COVID was going to happen. And if anyone told you otherwise, they're lying to you. So having human qualities backed by people who are passionate, have subject matter expertise, and are constantly learning are people I will always back, whether they have a dip or not, because I know they're committed. They will always pivot or learn, and always be people who want to do the best outcome for their investors as well as themselves and their team. That's extremely important, extremely important.
Okay, next question's from Kanchan. If you are an early stage, on what basis do you make the financial revenue projections?
So Kanchan, I think I touched on this earlier. This is a tricky, there's no set answer for that. But the way that you look at it is depending on the rate of growth in a business is what you do multiples of revenue generation on business. But if you're too early to project revenues, you have to look at template models for your geography and your sector. So while YC companies or Y Combinator companies may have starting rounds at $6 to $8 million on a specific sector, companies in the region may start at $2 million or $4 million based on the same sector, because the volume of business, the scale opportunity is different. So you'll have to look at what sector you operate in. You'll have to understand the trends of people who have raised in those and study that to understand the appetite for investors, to also look at what they were willing to invest, how quickly you can scale your solution, to then put a requirement for funding at X value for X percent.
Moving on, how do you size the problem or market size, TAM? I found this to be the hardest thing to quantify. So how do you build up and make it credible, because data isn't free/hard? Any methodology here?
This is where you're going to have to be really ingenious, or you're going to have to, this is what we call hustle. So, I mean, nothing. This is where the expectation of the investor is you will find a solution to a problem. So if there's no data out in the market, how are you going to make estimates on the market or of the total addressable market size? Are you going to go out and call if you're looking at an automotive problem, are you going to go and try and call the RTA and ask them what's happening? Are you trying to look at reports that are issued by Dubai police? Will you ask people on LinkedIn who work in these organizations and say, I'm doing a startup for solving problems of fueling of vehicles. Can you please tell me how many vehicles are registered in the UAE? This is where you will have to go above and beyond your comfort zone of trying to get traditional avenues of data and become more resourceful to dig it out. It's not straightforward. It's very frustrating. It's very tough. Accumulating data in this market is very, very, very new. It's just starting. So perhaps you look at population size and you look at the next neighboring country that does issue data, and you make an estimate based on that. So if the population of the UAE is 10 million and the nearest neighboring country with the same kind of GDP has 50 million, perhaps I assume that based on the same GDP size and population size, I can take 1/5 of that and say it's based on this assumption. And you say very clearly, again, to your investors, you assume that the market data is XYZ based on your nearest benchmark data source that has come from XYZ, and be clear about it. So it's not simple, but you have to be creative in how you try and compile that data to figure out what is the total addressable market size for the solution or service you're trying to provide.
Okay, from Pramod, this is, typically, how long does it take for you to close a funding deal? That is funds transferred to investee account. He has a second question. Do you want to answer the first one, or should I go?
Sure. So, Pramod, I will be slightly unkind or blunt here, so apologies in advance. As good as you are, as hot as the sector is as quickly as you'll close a funding round. If I'm a company that is doing 50% month-on-month growth for the last 12 months, and I have no signs of slowing down my growth, I can choose my investors. So I can close in 2 days, 1 week, 24 hours, and then the funding money will come in, typically depending on the size of the client. A VC will have certain procedures to sign off on documentation, verification, due diligence, and do it. So even if they've said, yes, I want allocation for $5 million and I'll take the entire round, they can sign a term sheet. You can go ahead and do the process. So you legally obligate each party to invest as much as possible. And then the funding process is as per individual VC, syndicate, their own process, their own speed, which may be as quickly as 1 week to 2 weeks, or as long as 2 months, depending on where their investment committee sits, where the funds is released from, the due diligence documentation that has to happen post agreeing that they'll invest in you. So it really depends. It really depends. I know some people that have been raising funds for 6 months, and they have to do it in 2 stages. They do a closing the first 3 months just to process all the paperwork, and then they do the rest of the closing in the next 3 months, because different people have different paces. So yeah, it depends on a lot of things.
Okay, next question from him, from Pramod. Do you insist on a board seat? If not, how do you engage with the investee startup once the investment has been made? Frequency, value add, etc.
So if I insisted on a board seat, I would not be happy having 100 board seats or 250 board seats. Trust me, I wouldn't have the time to do it. So not everyone insists on a board seat. Different people usually link board seats to the size of investment just to ensure that they can help the company as opposed to intrude on the company's life cycle. So usually companies choose that in your own startup, you choose that if somebody has 5% equity, or they have 15% equity, or if they have to have a minimum of 25% equity, then you would qualify for a board seat. Because when you have a board seat, it's not something that you take lightly. It is very, very, very critical. You have to be present, you have to vote, you have to make decisions. That voting has a power impact on the entire company, the team, the future of that company, and all the investors who have already put money in, who don't have a board seat. It impacts everyone. So not everyone insists on a board seat. A board seat is not given out by every company. They have their own metrics to decide at what equity ownership they give in board seats, what powers those board seats have, what limitations those board seats have, how long those board seats last for. It's its own category of understanding how that happens and what effect it has on your company. So I would say you have to be careful on understanding what those board seats look like. And in fact, a lot of the times board seats are very good because people who invest significant sizes to qualify for a board seat or insist on a board seat may be very useful for you to help you in areas that you're not an expert, whether it's financial modeling, legal, scaling, or technology in certain spaces. They will help actually in understanding you to take critical decisions. So look at it from that point of view.
Thanks, Gaurav. We have 25 open questions and we have 8 minutes left. I think we'll have to run at least 5 minutes over just for the interest
Sure,
of
no
the
issues.
audience.
Sure.
Are crowdfunding platforms a good idea? Which one would you recommend?
Wow. Is there a geography relevant to that question?
This
I
is
assume
from
it's for this
Sharad
region.
Agarwal. I'm not sure where he's from. So if you can add to that, then that would help.
Sure. I'm happy to. So again, crowdfunding platforms are a good idea depending on what business you are, how you operate, and how you're willing to be structured. If you're open and you're willing and you see value in what crowdfunding platforms do, right, for you as a business, then yes, they're a good idea. If you're willing to give them the fees for helping you raise money and give you that exposure, it makes sense. For other businesses, if you don't need the exposure and you don't need the platform to raise awareness for raising those funds, then you don't need it. So I would say sort of crowdfunding can be split up into 3 large categories without calling them crowdfunding, but they do essentially similar things. An angel syndicate might be one way of looking to raise funds in a similar fashion, where you have a group of people like Laden Ventures, or you have Venture Soup that go out with a roster of frequent angel investors that they propose your company to and help you raise funds for with fees attached to it, etc. Or you look at a crowdfunding platform like Eureka, or you look at an SME crowd-based funding platform for temporary bits, not for equity, but just against the business like TiE, right? And then the third one that you can look at is, you could look at Dubai Angels, which is not exactly a fee-based platform, but again, a great place to try and qualify your business to get crowdfunding for. So each one has their own structure. Each one has their own specific exposure of markets or angels or groups of people that you can get access to in return for filling in a spot on your investment cap table.
Okay, this is from Arun. Is it always necessary for a startup to have co-founders? Can't a solo founder make a mark with the founding team with ESOP considerations as a startup scales?
So yes, one person cannot carry the burden of an entire company. But if you have a solo founder that has 50 employees and you've delegated roles to everyone, you can do it. But as a rule of thumb, every single person I know that does investing will look negatively as a first impression on companies that do not have a co-founding team, because it is a partnership. It is very exhausting. It does require a lot more for you to do and swap roles and support each other in the 7 to 10 year journey where all you're doing is building a business, competing with other businesses, educating investors, and trying to get a return for those investors and solve a problem. So yes, I would say being a solo founder is a huge negative first impression, but the reality is, a team is always better. But if you are a repeat solo founder, I've never heard of them before in my life yet. I'm sure there are solo founders who have a very strong team, maybe 30 or 40 people or 10 people that they can delegate to, that have maybe vested interest in the company. You can do it. So while there may not technically be a co-founder, there has to be a team. But a co-founder is always, always, always preferable for investors to look at.
What distinguishes a pitch and possibility of raising funds for a startup offering a product versus a service?
Nothing. It's about the sector. So and the scalability of product. So that's what it really depends on. How good is the idea? It doesn't matter what you're pitching, whether it's a product or a service. It depends on the data, the credibility of your data sources, how big the problem is, the speed at which you can scale and solve the problems, protect your business, and have a USP and a moat to protect that business growing. So quite frankly, investors are looking for return on their investment, and they're looking for security and confidence in the team and the ability to execute. And then we look at, what is the subject matter expertise in the market? So they could be neck and neck, they could be vastly different. It's really more about the idea, the sector, and the team than it being purely a product or service.
Question from Anisha. How do you justify valuation to a VC despite having given justification on growth projections, multipliers, value of assets held, value of partnerships, etc.? They always want an aggressive discount.
Yep. Well, they have the unfair advantage. They have something you need, which is capital. If your business is in a position where you can't command that, because if my business is growing 50% month on month and I'm making a lot of money, it's very tough for VCs out there. Then money is neutral. But if my business is struggling and I'm not able to grow at the rate I need to grow in terms of my competition or anything else, that's where VCs will seek an opportunity to say that, listen, we'll fund you, but on XYZ terms, because they need to, their mandate is to return money to their investors in their fund. So if they can also, that's their business, to do that. So if that's an opportunity for them, they'll take it. So they will be as aggressive as they are in taking equity from you for the same amount of money as you are in trying to take money from them for the least amount of equity. You'll have to meet at some point in the middle, or that's the negotiation.
Question from Farouk. How do we convince the investors on overhead cost at early stage? What if they say the overhead is huge at early stage, but the product is ready and need people to launch the product?
That is a tough conundrum to solve. This is where people, try and do things like friends and family rounds, or they try and raise interim amount of cash to solve the problem, or they do proof of concepts to show that the technology works to satisfy the justification for a huge overhead to do it. So unfortunately, there's a lot of proving that startups have to do to give the security that if people want to invest, and the overheads are very large, that you have the capacity to return revenue at least till the next round when you raise your next amount of capital. It's unfortunate, but that's the fact of it.
Question from Sushil. Every investor is looking for technology startups. There are a lot of ideas which are not tech-based, but have high potential. Do you invest in such ideas, especially in automotive aftermarket service?
That's very, very interesting. I just did.
He's Sushil Bora, in case you both know each other.
Sorry?
His name is Sushil Bora. I don't know if you both know each other or if he knows you already.
Sorry, I don't know. But yes, I just have. But that startup has a technology base at the same time, though. So it's in that segment, but it's based on technology and services. So if you're looking at the reason people invest in technology-based startups is because they can scale. You can be an automotive startup, but you can still scale using technology. So if you're looking at, I have investments in healthy food companies. Had nothing to do with technology, but they scale very well, and that's a B2C business. So yes, people do invest in non-technology startups. It's absolutely part of what it is. I mean, people invest in factories, people invest in manufacturing, people invest in retail businesses. So
there are investors who invest in non-technology, but technology is favorable because the scope to scale generally is much faster and much more promising for then generating a return on income. So it depends. It depends. Are you looking at investors who are looking for a multiple return on their investment with a very high risk opportunity? Or you're looking at people who are looking at a dividend return on your business, where you're paying out money almost like an interest or a loan against the investment. So it's a different construct, in which case you have to look at it from that perspective.
How important is it to include the context of competitors in your pitch for raising funds?
2000%. I couldn't stress that enough. That is again, basics 101. You have to demonstrate knowledge of your surroundings, regional surroundings and international surroundings. If there's competition that's in New York, you should mention it because it demonstrates your capability to understand that you are aware that there are people who are competing with you. So it is essential that you do that. It is mandatory that you do that, just as it is mandatory for you to demonstrate and back up all your information for size of market, your technology, or business with data. It is mandatory for you to demonstrate that you understand competition.
So there are some questions for you, Gaurav. What's your minimum and maximum ticket size?
Ooh, not public information, sorry. So I won't answer that on a public forum. Private questions can be asked that.
And there's been requests for email IDs. Are you okay to share your email ID? You have...
Happy to share I'm happy to share my contact details with the audience, but I have to be very, very honest. Please be patient with me to come back and respond to you. I will do my best efforts and I will get back to you eventually. I do have, I have bandwidth where I'm currently doing a lot of projects and advisory, but I would genuinely and honestly try to help you or try to help answer your questions.
So I would try to make it easier for you. Whoever is interested, drop a mail to TiE Dubai at tiedubai.org, and then we'll direct you to Gaurav. So that way there's at least whoever's really interested is going to take a second step to get to you. So it's TiE Dubai at tiedubai.org. I will type that in the chat. Gaurav, do you want to choose your last question? I think we should close in interest of time. We've already crossed, but we had so many questions.
Okay. Okay, let me just...
Yeah, there's a lot of questions. I will type the email ID while you pick your last question.
Okay, I'm going to try and pick a question, and you can help me as well. Pick a question that's in the benefit of the whole group as opposed to individuals, because then perhaps it'll have a more benefit for the entire audience. And then as individual questions, I will answer individually. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes absolute sense. I have shared the email. If anybody is interested to connect with Gaurav, do drop an email to TiE Dubai at tiedubai.org. We will connect him to you. And this is the last question. And I also have a poll just to understand how valuable the session was for you. Do answer while you're here.
Sorry, say again?
I'm running a poll on how today's session was.
Sorry, everyone. I apologize for the lull in our session. There are a few questions here, so I'm just trying to go through them, and so I can. Okay, I guess yes. I think I picked one question, which is actually quite interesting for everyone. I am biased. Is there any point in cold outreach to investors? Are they taken seriously, or should we stick to warm introductions only? I don't know. It's an anonymous attendee that's asked this question, but it's relevant to all of you. Absolutely do a cold outreach to investors. This is where you have to be persistent, but be respectful. If you reach out to somebody consistently and they don't respond to you, please, you can keep trying to contact them, but be very respectful, be very polite, and be very, very, very encouraging that you believe that there's benefit for the person that you are trying to reach in a cold way, in a cold call manner, to do that, whether it's on LinkedIn or over email. If somebody responds to you and says they're not interested at all, you should thank them for their response and close it out, right? And warm introductions are always going to be better introductions, easier introductions to explain your story, go through the process, and then, be able to deliver the message and hopefully raise money from either a VC or a startup. So I would say do both. You have to do both, and try your luck. This is where you have to be persistent, and people, you will be rewarded for being genuine and, and hustling. But be very mindful about the way you do it. Be respectful of people's time. You don't want to get on the wrong side of people that you're trying to raise money from.
Yeah, that question was actually from Hamza from Let's Work. He just put that in chat now.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So thank you, Gaurav. I think, there's a lot of questions and there's a lot of interest, obviously, in this field. Everybody wants to raise funds, and thank you for your time. Thank you for all the valuable inputs. I will forward all the emails that come through to you. So if you want to have them share anything specific, let's ask them now, so that whoever is really interested at least gives you, it doesn't have too many emails and you're not able to keep up with any. At least the important ones should reach you and you should be able to give it enough time and attention. So is there anything that you want specified in the email, or they just...
It depends on the nature of their requests. So if they can be very clear about the nature of their requests, what they're looking for, details around that to start with, and then they can tell me what they have, that's going to be very important, because then I can be very clear about people who are asking for advice, people who are asking for fundraising, people who are asking for information or guidance. Then I can see whether I can help them or redirect them to other parties that may be useful.
Yeah, thanks, Gaurav. So for all of you who are writing an email to reach out to Gaurav, just be specific, because it will help him and you to get the right response in the right time.
Thanks so much.
Everybody.
Pleasure.
Thanks.
I hope that was useful.